Whether reason will prevail depends only partly upon us. We must hope and strive for the best. We must prepare for the worst.
Well, I mean, Trump and Vance came to office saying that they were going to stand for free speech and then they would not use the government to infringe on free speech and that they would defend the rights of those with whom they disagree. And then what the FCC commissioner did was one of the most naked violations of that I've ever seen. I mean, he went on a right-wing podcast and suggested that not only Disney, but local affiliates stop airing the Jimmy Kimmel show because of comments Kimmel made that he didn't like. And the largest owner of local affiliates in the country, Nexstar, which needs Brendan Carr right now for this major merger. They're trying to buy their largest competitor. They need not only the FCC to approve it, but the FCC to change their rules, which right now say that only, no media organization can own TV affiliates that reach more than 39% of American households. And this deal would bring it up to like 80 or something like that. So they not only need Brendan Carr's approval, they need Brendan Carr to change the rules at the FCC. Within hours after Brendan Carr saying that, Nexstar, said, that's what we're doing. And they said that they were not going to air Kimmel anymore. And then Sinclair followed soon after. And that meant like 60 TV stations, local TV affiliates, including mine here in Washington, D.C., did not air the Jimmy Kimmel show once he came back to air. So, I mean, it was just like it was the government directly saying, I don't like this speech. And local affiliates, you should do X, Y, Z to remove this speech from the airwaves. And it was pretty shocking, I thought. And I have a record on this sort of thing. When I was a White House correspondent for ABC News, the Obama White House was, and this is not the same thing, and I'm not comparing them, but the Obama White House was trying to label Fox News as not a legitimate news organization. And they tried to freeze them out of a pool rotation for an interview. And A, all the networks banded together and said, you can't do that. You can't freeze Fox out. And B, I asked the White House why it was appropriate in their view for the White House to label a credentialed news organization not a legitimate news organization. And look, I have my opinions on Fox, but that's not the point. The point is, why is it appropriate for the government to be doing that? So I just felt like this was a pretty horrific violation of that principle. And I'm glad that Disney reversed itself, and I hope that other media giants follow suit. We're in the downward spiral. It's just a question of how blatant it is. Like, for example, what happened with Colbert? I mean, we all suspect we know what happened, but that was all behind the scenes. Sherry Redstone wanted this deal to go through, and the timing of the announcement of the cancellation of Colbert was very fishy. That all happened right before the FCC approved the merger. Right now, Apple TV has put on hold a show called Savant with Jessica Chastain, which has to do with her. It's based on a true story. It has to do with her character investigating hate groups. And they really gave no indication as to why they suspended the release of the show indefinitely. People think it might have something to do with the horrific assassination of Charlie Kirk or whatever. I don't know, but like we already see, I mean, as Henry II did when he said, will no one rid me of this turbulent priest? And then all of a sudden 4 people came and assassinated the Archbishop of Canterbury. Like sometimes it's not a direct order. It's just, oh, I hate this. And then all of a sudden people start following the direction that is implied. I think we are in the midst of that, and whether it continues to spiral downward or not, it depends on how the CEOs act and the pressure they feel. If they feel, I think that it's been hypothesized to me that the reason that Bob Iger reversed the Disney decision was because he was worried about his legacy. And also that he saw that there was pushback and that the financial incentives were not just one way, that they, that they were both ways. The more that, and look, I think that there should be conservative TV programming, liberal TV programming, libertarian TV program. I just think there should be a freedom for all this, and people shouldn't be worried about upsetting whoever happens to be in the Oval Office at any given moment. But I am worried about it. I didn't like when it came out, the degree to which the Biden administration was pushing YouTube and Google and Twitter and others to disallow speech they didn't like, not just racist or Nazi speech, but also just speech they didn't like that didn't violate the policies of the social media organizations, like the lab leak theory during COVID. I mean, there was no reason for that to be blocked. So I fear that we're in the middle of a downward slide, but I hope not. I think that in addition to violence on the left and violence on the right, and this is a little bit more complicated to talk about, but I think there's also kind of just this nihilistic violence of people who are just, and this gets into what you're talking about, the desperation, that people don't necessarily have a particular ideology per se. They're not doing this to advance the progressive cause or stop conservatives or vice versa. It's just that they don't know what to do. They have mental health struggles. They have easy access to firearms. I think that there is right now in American culture a very dangerous incentive structure built up around demonizing people. You see it's worse now than it's ever been in terms of just literally the incentive structure for monetization is about bad guys. And look, the Rupert Murdoch's business empire is built on the idea of like, we want people to be scared or we want them to be angry. It's about creating villains. And that is, you see that on the New York Post, you see that at Fox, et cetera. But what we're seeing on social media takes it even further. Not to blame it on Murdoch, just like the idea of bad guys. We're creating bad guys. And I see it on the left and the right. And I think that there's just a lot of misinformation and a lot of, because of the desperation you talked about, because of the isolation, because of people not connecting, it can lead to very, very ugly places and ugly things. And, it's not always just like a neat little box of, well, this person was motivated by this, that might be the case with Charlie Kirk's assassin, who it seems as though was at least based on the information we have now, in a relationship with somebody who's trans and thought that Charlie Kirk was spreading hate against the trans community. Again, I'm not justifying this as a horrific act of violence, but I'm saying like that appears to be the motive as we see it right now. But we also see other acts of violence that are not that simple. That guy who had CTE who went into the New York skyrise and tried to kill people with the NFL. And then some of the reaction online when some of the innocent victims were killed, or some of the reaction online we've seen with the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. There's a lot of anger out there and a lot of demonization, and it's leading to some very unhealthy acts and some very unhealthy support for those acts. I love sleuthing. I love the stories about how they find bad guys. True stories are even better than not true, than fiction. So I was at my son's 13th birthday party. He wanted a paintball party, so we went out to rural Virginia, like an hour outside of DC, and the kids were all paintballing. And I'd done this before, so I know that like it's such a haul for the grown-ups that I just have pizza and drinks for the grown-ups too, so they can just chill out for a couple hours and they don't have to spend 4 hours in a car. They can just spend 2. And anyway, one of the dads comes up to me and says, I know Dave Roller from The Outpost. The Outpost was a book I wrote about Afghanistan that came out 13 years ago. I know Dave Roller from The Outpost. And I said, that book, that was a true story about an outpost in Afghanistan that was intact by like 300, 400 Taliban one day, and 8 American soldiers were killed, and all the rest, a true story. Anyway, I said that story was really difficult for me to write because the military keeps such crappy records and they're really reluctant to share any of them. And the dad, Dave Bitcower, said, tell me about it. And he starts telling me this story about a case he worked on where he was at the Eastern District of New York, an assistant U.S. attorney in Brooklyn, and he gets a call from the FBI. The Italians, during the Arab Spring, had commandeered a cruise ship, and they just had a whole ship full of refugees. And one guy asked a guard for some water, and the guard noticed he had a bullet wound. And how'd you get the bullet wound? Oh, I was fighting Americans in Afghanistan. I'm with Al-Qaeda. They take him into custody. They interrogate him. And they call the Americans, and they're like, have you heard of this guy? He says his name is Spin Ghoul, and he's killed Americans. And they'd heard of him. He'd gone off the radar for a few years, but they had heard of him. So the long story short is the Americans have a very short period of time to prove a case against Spin Ghoul, so they can lock him up forever, or the Italians are going to stick him in a refugee camp and he'll escape and, slaughter as many Americans as possible. So the sleuthing of the story, he just starts to tell me about the sleuthing, and then we found this, and then we found that, and then there was this fingerprint and that fingerprint, and just like all these things were just, and I was at the edge of my seat. And then when he was done, I'm like, has anyone told this story before? Has this been told? He said, no, people covered when he was prosecuted, because they did ultimately get him to the United States for prosecution. And he was the first foreign terrorist ever prosecuted in a U.S. criminal court for killing American service members on a battlefield. It never happened before. Anyway, I was just like, wow. And, a week later, I was taking him and his colleague out to lunch, and I just thought it was this riveting story.